Not many people know this, but in the 1970s, a San Francisco pizzeria owner named Tom Hansen, one day, out of the blue, had a crazy idea to make a low-budget movie about the Zodiac in order to catch the actual real-life Zodiac. And the craziest thing? It almost worked. Art is meaningless. Art is important. It's simple escapism, but it can also be the zenith of social, political, and cultural architecture. This is the dichotomy that every artist grapples with on a daily basis, piecing together words and paint colors to create a tapestry that either speaks to the life of the mind or sells action figures. Or both. And nobody skirted this duality quite like Tom Hansen, a San Francisco pizzeria owner from the Midwest who, in 1971, directed the very first ever film adaptation of the story of the Zodiac, an anonymous serial killer who operated in Northern California throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s, brutally taking the lives of 5 confirmed victims, though he claimed it was actually 37. The movie came out only a year after the last Zodiac victim, and right on the tail of a multi-year media fiasco where the Zodiac, or possibly somebody pretending to be them, toyed with local San Francisco news publications by sending in ominous letters predicting their future crimes. Despite all the clues, the consistent correspondence with the media and the police, and a growing body count, nobody was ever able to identify the real Zodiac, though there are countless theories and many people will tell you they know his identity for a fact. And for whatever reason, this small business owner from Minnesota woke up one morning and came up with the perfect master plan to unmask and capture the Zodiac. And it involved making a terrible B-movie. His restaurant chains were also financially floundering at the time, and he was looking to jump the restaurant ship and get into the entertainment business, so, take that as you will. And I've just got to pre-warn you up front, while this story is undoubtedly true, and there are many people to corroborate that all of these events took place, a lot of the information on the details and the stuff that happened behind closed doors are from Tom Hansen himself, and you've got to take it with a bit of a grain of salt. Because as you'll find out, Tom Hansen is, let's just say, quite the character. But before we get to that, let's go back and talk about Hansen. How does a guy go from being a small-time entrepreneur from the Midwest to an independent schlock film director who almost personally caught one of the most notorious criminals in history with his bare hands? Throughout the 1960s, Tom Hansen was a restaurant owner operating out of Minnesota before eventually moving to California. He owned a number of successful A&W and Chicken Delight franchises before founding his own chain of pizza restaurants called Pizza Man. And for the record, even though his business eventually failed, he sold Pizza Man to another entrepreneur, and it still exists to this day, primarily in California. If you've never had it before, it is terrible pizza, and its only saving grace is that it's cheap and has free delivery. I survived on this pizza for a majority of my 20s, and I don't want to go back. But in the late 60s, Hansen relocated to San Francisco to operate his pizza chain. But things ended up going south really quickly for his pie flipping aspirations. I went into Pizza Man on a wing and a prayer. It was a good little franchise too. I was supposed to get just under $8 million from the underwriter in New York, but everything went down the toilet because he went broke and I lost everything. I was going down the tubes with Pizza Man and I thought, well, on the way down, I'll make a couple pictures. Hansen decided to try and pull his finances out of a tailspin by going into the movie business. But why would somebody make the leap from pizza joints to Tom Hansen joints? Can you call it a joint if Spike Lee didn't direct it? I don't know the rules about these things. Well, as it turns out, Hansen had been an actor in the Bay Area filmmaking scene on the side while running his restaurant business. So not only was movie making a familiar pool to wade into for Hansen, but as he says, I'd worked on half a dozen low-budget films, which is where I learned what you've got to do to finish the damn things. During this time as an actor, he was in several low-budget exploitation films produced by his friend Anthony Cardoza, a pioneer of the girl gang biker movie subgenre. Films like Night Train to Mundo Fine, Hellcats, Bigfoot, and Outlaw Riders. According to Hansen, he was instrumental in those movies getting made. Due to the lack of budget, they often featured undertrained and barely cooperative real-life biker gangs as background actors, and he was the only one who could keep them under control. Tony liked to have me around on those things, because nobody could control the bikers but me. You get 40 galloping gooses, 25 Hell's Angels, 25 Satan's slaves. I was the only guy who could handle them. We did a scene in a burial ground, but these guys were doing wheelies. People are burying their mothers and fathers, and these are doing wheelies over their graves. He even considered making his own girl gang biker movie called Revolt of the Mamas. Smash that subscribe button if you wish Tom Hansen had made Revolt of the Mamas instead of trying to catch a notorious serial killer. But as it turned out, it wasn't in the cards for Hansen. On December 20th, 1968, David Arthur Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, a young couple, were found dead on Lake Herman Road in Vallejo, California. Then, on July 4th, 1969, Michael Renault Mago, 19, and Darlene Elizabeth Farron, 22, were found dead in a parking lot in Vallejo. The crimes weren't connected until a few weeks later when someone sent 3 letters into various local newspapers taking credit for the killings and signing the notes as the Zodiac. This was the beginning of a tense and disturbing period in the California Bay Area, with a new set of letters from the Zodiac being sent to various San Francisco newspapers every 17 days or so, taking credit for recent crimes and predicting future ones. At one point, the sender actually included body parts in their packages they claimed were from the victims. But forensic science just wasn't far enough along at the time, and despite their best efforts, the police were never able to identify a suspect. Though there were a few persons of interest such as Arthur Lee Allen and many other pet suspects who many, to this day, believe were the Zodiac, despite police never being able to prove it or convict them. And so, by the time Tom Hansen was looking to get into the movie business, the Zodiac was confirmed to have killed 5 people, critically injured 2, was a suspect in 5 additional cases, and personally claimed a body count of 37. He was regularly sending in letters to local San Francisco news publications, bragging about his crimes, and the entire city was in a constant state of terror. New details about the Zodiac case were probably as ubiquitous to people living in San Francisco at the time as the constant updates about political current affairs are now. So it's no surprise that the idea popped into Hansen's mind one day that he might have a good chance of breaking into movie making if he became the first person to make a feature film about the Zodiac. But it would turn out to be much bigger than that for him. He scraped together $13,000 for a budget, called up every film industry connection he had from his acting, biker gang wrangling days, and set about to shoot The Zodiac Killer, a hastily thrown together, wildly exploitative depiction of the Zodiac's crime spree that shamelessly capitalized off of the pain and terror that was still fresh in the hearts and minds of the city's residents, but which also took many wild liberties in filling in the details about the story. For instance, the movie depicts the Zodiac as having a satanic altar in their basement, as well as having a collection of pet rabbits, both of which Hansen freely admits were completely made up so that they could fill in the gaps in the plot and get the movie finished as quickly as possible. And I won't spend too much time talking about this, but I've seen the movie a couple times actually, and I'll just cut to the chase. It's not a good movie. I mean, I still think it's worth watching for reasons that we'll learn, but it's not the David Fincher Zodiac movie. And these parts in particular are very strange. This thing where he has these pet rabbits that he's obsessed with, and also he has this underground altar in his basement that he prays to. And they feel so goofy and so out of a cheesy horror movie that it completely takes you out of the seriousness of the film. Definitely recommend checking it out of curiosity, but I just got to tell you right now that it's not good. The movie starred an unknown actor, Hal Reed, as the Zodiac, and was shot and edited in only a few short weeks. And while the movie was mostly stapled together for a few $1,000 by a bunch of seat-of-their-pants amateur wackos with reckless abandon, Hansen did actually arrange to meet on a few occasions with Paul Avery, a paranoid San Francisco journalist who briefly became a target of threats by the Zodiac in his ominous letters and was portrayed by Robert Downey Jr. in the 2007 David Fincher-directed film Zodiac, to do some consulting for the details of the film. However, upon watching The Zodiac Killer, it immediately becomes very clear that either Avery did not provide very accurate accounts of the events, or Hansen decided to disregard whatever Avery told him and craft his own narrative. One that involved fluffy bunnies. So, Paul Avery earned his consulting fee, which was probably Hansen just giving him a 2-for-1 coupon to Pizza Man, which honestly, I wouldn't even redeem. My stomach is cramping just thinking about that. Hansen was eventually able to get a distribution deal for the film, but more importantly, before that ever happened, he four-walled a week-long screening engagement at San Francisco's historic RKO Theater in April of 1971. Four-walling is when a production company or studio directly pays a movie theater to rent one of their auditoriums for a screening instead of working through a distributor to sell their movie as part of a larger package, which is how it usually works. While The Zodiac Killer will go down in history as a pretty forgettable exploitation flick that took heavy liberties with the true story and was fairly insensitive to be made at the time and place it was made, the events that took place at these movie screenings at the RKO Theater are easily more fascinating than the film itself, and will go down in history as one of the craziest harebrained schemes ever concocted. Like Bugs Bunny level of harebrained. Tom Hansen was about to hatch an insane plan to lure the actual true blue Zodiac to one of these movie screenings and capture him without the help of the police. And not only does it almost work, but Hansen himself potentially, depending on how much you believe the word of a maverick pizza-tossing indie film producer, came face to face with the Zodiac himself and was incredibly close to actually ending his reign of terror for good. It was crunch time for Tom Hansen at this point. A killer roamed free in his city, unchecked and unbested by authorities, lurking in the shadows and ready to strike again, ready to leave San Francisco in a sustained state of horror for the foreseeable future. The sanctity of his adopted stomping grounds was at stake, and it seemed like nobody else was going to fix it. But Hansen had a plan, a foolproof scheme that relied on Hansen's understanding of the human psychopathic mind, an understanding he'd gained and honed throughout years of taking down crazed biker gangs and navigating the cutthroat world of the chain restaurant business. And before you come for me pointing out that Hansen didn't actually have any kind of expert understanding of serial killer psychology, trust me, I'm aware. As with most of Hansen's assessments about himself and his accomplishments, you have to take his own claims of expertise with that patented grain of salt. But I mean, you've got to admit, whatever Hansen's actual level of understanding, the plan he was about to put into action had a certain genius to it. He'd slapped together a movie in a few weeks for the sole purpose of serving as bait for a plan to catch the Zodiac. But how was he going to do it? Well, it was simple, and it hinged on a few key details. Number one, Hansen figured that anybody who regularly mailed letters to the media bragging about their crimes and taunting the police about failing to catch them had to be a bona fide narcissist. Somebody so self-obsessed that they'd walk blindly into a trap if you could figure out how to appeal to and exploit their self-absorption. Number two, Hansen had noted that in one of the Zodiac's letters, he'd referred to the 1934 film The Most Dangerous Game, meaning he was a movie fan. And number three, the Zodiac had been regularly mailing letters to local San Francisco publications for the past 6 months, so he had to be living in or very near the city. The way Hansen saw it, if he screened a movie about the Zodiac and advertised it in all the local papers and TV and radio stations, the real Zodiac wouldn't be able to resist showing up to see a movie about himself and sit anonymously in a crowded theater surrounded by unsuspecting people who had no idea that he was amongst them. Some say that the only way to beat the devil at a game of chess is to stick a mirror in the room so he can't stop staring at himself. And Tom Hansen was gambling that the same plan would work on the Zodiac. To him, and I have to admit the logic is pretty solid, it was a sure bet that the actual Zodiac would show up to at least one of these screenings. The only question was how they'd identify him amongst the crowd of people and what they'd do with him once he'd been made. That's where the plan came into play. Hansen assembled a ragtag crew, Bob Jones and Hal Reed, 2 actors in the film, his brother-in-law Art Perrine, Ray Cantrell, the movie screenwriter, and Ray Lynch. They would be manning the screening and working together to coordinate a plan to catch the Zodiac. Using his talent for wheeling and dealing that probably came from a life of running fast food restaurants, he reached out to a local Kawasaki dealership and worked out a partnership. As a promotional deal, they provided a brand new Kawasaki motorcycle, which Hansen parked right in the center of the lobby of the theater for everyone to see as they filed in to see the film. Why? Because the motorcycle would be raffled off to some lucky moviegoer attending a screening of The Zodiac Killer. Each person who bought tickets to see the movie was also given a raffle ticket to be entered into the drawing. They had to fill out their name and other information and drop the ticket into a podium box next to the motorcycle. Why was this important? Well, Hansen made several photocopies of all the various letters the Zodiac had mailed into newspapers. The plan was to compare the handwriting on the raffle ticket to the handwriting in the Zodiac letters. Once they found a handwriting match, they would apprehend the Zodiac and save the city from many more months or years of terror. And how, you ask, would they know which person filled out which raffle ticket? Perhaps they'd have a team of police officers watching the podium through a security camera, closely monitoring each person as the raffle tickets were examined, and sending a team of armed officers down into the lobby to arrest the Zodiac right then and there? Yeah, that sounds great, except Hansen didn't tell the police about his plan for fear that they'd shut it down. Hell, he didn't even tell the owner of the movie theater what they were planning on doing. He knew we were up to something, but he didn't know what. I think he just hoped that no shooting was going to go on in his theater. It was kind of touchy. So how then did they expect to catch the Zodiac? Well, it was easy. The 6 men worked in shifts. 1 man would climb inside the podium stand with a flashlight. Each person dropped the raffle ticket into the box. He would examine the handwriting on the ticket in real time and compare it with photocopies of the Zodiac letters. What would he do if he found a match? Well, for that, Hansen and his boys wheeled a giant standing freezer unit out into the lobby to stand next to the podium, presumably to hold the various fudgesicles, bomb pops, and San Francisco favorite It's that would be enjoyed by the theatergoers as they watched their gruesome serial killer film. But in actuality, another guy was hiding in the freezer and waiting for a signal to come through his walkie-talkie. If the podium guy found a handwriting match, he'd send the signal to the freezer guy, who would jump out and grab the person who had just dropped a ticket into the podium. Then they'd keep the Zodiac in custody until the police arrived. Simple, right? That particular kind of genius where it sounds great when you first hear it, but if you think about it for like 3 seconds, it suddenly sounds completely insane and stupid. But then, if you think about it for maybe like 30 minutes straight, you suddenly reach a level of nirvana and realize it's the only thing that could ever possibly work. Well, the screening started happening, and Hansen's plan was set into motion. But there were problems right away. The movie's crew had access to bottomless fountain sodas and were chugging them throughout the screenings, and Hansen had forgotten to take one thing into account for this whole plan: frequent bathroom breaks. The 6 men rotated duties hiding under the podium, but even still, there were many instances where the other guys were busy elsewhere, and the guy under the podium would slip away to visit the little boy's room, leaving it unattended for several minutes, meaning that dozens of people were able to drop their tickets into the slot with no one around to check their handwriting. And why, you ask, would these men who were executing a covert plan to catch the Zodiac, the very safety of the citizens of San Francisco hanging in the balance, be so careless and irresponsible? Well, I don't know. I guess that's what you get when you recruit a bunch of amateur actors to help you run a sting operation instead of, say, the police? Not that they would have been any better at it considering that they never caught the guy. But that wasn't the only massive bungle. During a screening, one of the guys in the freezer, Ray Cantrell, the screenwriter of the movie, was standing in the freezer waiting for his signal when he started to notice that it was hard to breathe. It turned out they hadn't properly ventilated the freezer, and whereas on most nights they were leaving the door slightly cracked open, he had accidentally fully shut it this time. He tried to radio for help through the walkie-talkie, but nobody was listening, and the door wasn't designed to be open from the inside. Eventually, after gasping for air for a few minutes and pounding on the door, all of which was drowned out by the noise of the lobby crowd, he passed out. By sheer luck, one of the other guys happened to open the door to check on him and found him unconscious and near death. He was revived and turned out okay. Another weird roadblock they faced was the theater owner constantly suspicious of what the guys were up to, walking around, questioning them, and getting in the way of their covert operation. Ultimately, the plan didn't end up being as foolproof as Hansen had originally envisioned. They screened the movie multiple times over the course of a week, and due to the various setbacks, botched steps, and possibly just dubious nature of the entire plan working in the first place, there was never a victory moment where somebody got to jump out of the freezer, apprehend the Zodiac, and smile for the paparazzi as he was carted away to prison. So, it was a bust then, right? No. Despite all the bungles and poorly planned details, it nearly worked. During one of the screenings, Hansen and his team found a raffle ticket in the podium that had the words, "I am the Zodiac, I was here," written on it. As Hansen suspected, that's exactly the kind of thing that the Zodiac would do. Perhaps it was just a prankster who wanted to have a bit of fun with whomever would be evaluating the raffle tickets. But then again, that would be a pretty big coincidence, right? They ran a fake raffle so that they could monitor the tickets and catch the Zodiac, and then some punk kid just happened to write that on the ticket. At the very least, it's incredibly compelling. But the point is ultimately moot because nobody was manning the podium or the freezer when the ticket was dropped into the box, so there was no way of identifying who it was. However, the most eerie close call happened later. Despite all of Hansen's carefully, or maybe not so carefully, laid plans, he believes that he actually came face to face with the Zodiac in the most unexpected way. It happened when he was taking a bathroom break during one of his shifts in the podium. He was standing at a urinal when another man entered the bathroom and walked up to the stall next to him. While Hansen relieved himself in silence, the stranger looked over at him and said, "You know, real blood doesn't come out like that." Hansen turned and looked at the guy, who he claims exactly matched the police sketch of the Zodiac that had been drawn from first-person accounts of the survivors who had seen him. I zipped up, turned, and saw the same face that was on the wanted poster. Same eyes, nose, mouth, hair, everything. After the two men exited the bathroom, Hansen approached the stranger and claimed he was a brother of one of the Zodiac's victims. He said that he did this to see if it would cause the man to break his composure in any way, but according to Hansen, the guy didn't even flinch. He led the man into an office in the theater and attempted to get the police to take him into custody, but after a few hours, it was determined that they had no legal right to hold him and the man was allowed to leave. And that was that. The week-long engagement at the theater ended, and no criminal was ever caught. The movie eventually got a distribution deal and made it into more theaters, but it was never a hit. Hansen followed up that film with another movie in 1972 titled A Ton of Grass Goes to Pot, about a group of friends that planned to smuggle a ton of illicit substances from Mexico to the US by using a hot air balloon. It also did okay. Hansen moved back to the Midwest and tried to relaunch his restaurant chain career. The Zodiac was never caught and still remains anonymous to this day, probably long dead. The reign of terror slowly petered out as the Zodiac went dormant. No more victims, no more letters. Most of the country lost interest. But Hansen wasn't quite done with the Zodiac. Eventually, in 1974, he moved back to California and decided that he needed to continue pursuing the man he'd identified in that bathroom stall. He tracked down the guy's address, hired private investigators to stalk him, and launched a new scheme. He sent men to the alleged Zodiac's house to tell him he'd won a sweepstakes prize, but then retracted the prize at the last minute so that they could take it and extract his fingerprints off of it. But they didn't find any prints. He had a private eye call the place where the guy worked and ask for his personal information. When the employer asked why they wanted to know, the detective told the truth and said he was suspected to be the Zodiac. The guy was fired. Tom Hansen was the OG of cancel culture. Eventually, Hansen gave up for good. Although, to this day, Hansen and his son continue researching the man, trying to dig up any evidence or proof that he was the real Zodiac. It's rather odd that Hansen relegated a short 4-year period to his film directing career, and then went on to spend several more decades obsessing over the identity of the Zodiac, considering, as Hansen himself has stated, the real story is, I was trying to make films, and I knew getting into the business was going to be tough. And I knew when you make low-budget movies, they're usually junk, because it's hard to get above that. So I thought I'd take a shortcut. I was going to catch him and use that for the end of the film. And I thought that would then launch me into making other films with a few more bucks and doing it right. When you're trying to break through and get something done and you've got no money, you gotta try and do something, you know? Despite Hansen's initial insistence that he'd hatched this plan with the altruistic goal of ending the Zodiac's reign of terror in the Bay Area, with maybe a little sprinkle of wanting to launch a movie career on the side, and swearing that he was convinced the man that he'd seen in the bathroom on that night was in fact the real deal. So much so that he pursued him for years afterwards, like his own mini version of Robert Graysmith's years-long crusade to catch the Zodiac. He came out years later to claim that, actually, he was just in it for the box office buccarinos. But what was the truth? Had he been faking his heroism all along? Or was this the lie? A retcon he concocted to save face after his miserably failed plan started to become more known to the public once the Zodiac Killer was re-released on Blu-ray in 2017 and gained cult status. After all, it doesn't matter as much that he had the Zodiac right in his grasp and let him slip away due to his own utter incompetence, if the whole thing was just a silly publicity stunt. At that point, it's just a funny story and not a man's tarnished legacy. We probably won't ever know. Tom Hansen is a slippery, enigmatic figure who always seems like he's got a few things hidden up his sleeves at all times. Kind of like the medium of film itself. Much like the theatrics of the Zodiac during that dark time in the early 70s, or the way filmmakers capitalize off of tragedy while masquerading as spreading awareness, or that contest to win a Kawasaki motorcycle. Much about cinema is fake, a facade, a divine illusion. And Tom Hansen may have pulled off one of the finest examples of fakery in cinematic history, making The Zodiac Killer a truly important and influential film. And that can be his legacy. Along with maybe serial harassing an innocent man and ruining his life with false accusations, but that's neither here nor there. Tom Hansen has admitted that the entire thing was a publicity stunt that he used to try and kickstart a directing career. Or maybe he didn't and it was something else. But much like his plot to catch the Zodiac, that almost worked too. But, as they say, almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. And also, when you get an 89% and your teacher rounds it up to a 90, or when you're a couple cents short on your Taco Bell order but they give it to you anyway, and probably a million other scenarios that I'm just thinking about now. But my point is that neither thing ever quite happened for Tom Hansen. So, it's odd that he latched on to the white whale of this alleged Zodiac he met in the bathroom of the RKO Theater that night. And I wonder if that means that the finest forgeries are the ones that even the forger can't tell apart from the original. Thank you so much for watching the video. This is a fun one for me. I've always been really captivated by this story because it's one of those stories where the thing that Tom Hansen wanted to do is simultaneously really dumb, but also kind of genius when you think about it. And every time I think about the story, I get like lost in that back and forth loop of like, was this a really good idea that could have worked? Or was this the dumbest thing that anyone's ever tried to do? And that oscillation between those two things is what keeps me coming back to the story over and over again. I love it so much. I was really excited to share it with you. And, you know, aside from looking more into the story and kind of reading some of the interviews with Tom Hansen, which I would recommend, they're pretty fascinating. I would recommend checking out the movie, The Zodiac Killer, just for posterity's sake, if you are interested in this story and you want to know more. But like I said before, I just got to pre-warn you that this movie is awful. It's not good. It's not even really like so bad it's good, or one of those types of like cult campy movies that you really enjoy watching. It's a pretty bizarre but ultimately dry experience. That's not selling it at all, but I still would recommend that you check it out. I have a link to check it out in the description. It's not like an affiliate where I'm making money off of it or whatever. It's just there for you to check out if you want. So feel free. And yeah, please like the video, subscribe to my channel so you can see future content. I'm making one of these videos every 2 weeks, plus all of my shorts, which come out nearly daily. There's a lot of cool stuff on this channel, and I really hope that you stick around and check it out.